Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hey, this is Lauren Mary Kim, and I'm the stunt double for Ahsoka Tano in Clone Wars and the armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode features our 4th installment of our series celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace. But before we dive into that, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Of course. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we're now broadcasting to the galaxy. Jay, we normally spend some time setting up what we're going to talk about here, but this is quite possibly the longest episode of this podcast we've ever recorded.
Yeah.
And so we've got Gregg Cass, who you'll know from a lot of different places, and we'll describe all those in just a second here. It's a great conversation. We had a lot of fun doing it. Let's dive right on in. So we are pleased to welcome to Podcast Stardust for the first time, Gregg Cass. You know him as Ion Canon on social media and a contributor to the Roll Base Card and the Long Take Review podcast. Gregg, welcome to Podcast Stardust. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you for having me. It's I feel like I won a contest. I opened up a Wonka bar with a golden ticket to get to join you two, who I know you both on social media and online, and it's great to be on the show. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you, Greg, for sure. And thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, I've been excited to have you on the show and get your take on this movie and other things related to Star Wars. So let's kick off this discussion. We usually have some questions for our guests about their experience with the Phantom Menace. Jay, you want to kick it off?
Yeah. All right. So, Greg, tell us about your first experience seeing the Phantom Menace. Do you remember where you saw it, who you were with, what your initial reaction was, or any special memories?
Yeah, it's so exciting to be in the 25th anniversary right now and be thinking about that very special summer that I will always remember fondly. So I call myself a child of the dark times, meaning I became a Star Wars fan in between the two trilogies and really fell in love with Star Wars on VHS tapes. And so across those kind of mid to late 90s, I was getting more invested in fandom and reading all the books and buying the action figures when they started coming out. So the prequels felt like they were just for me. It's like, hey, you got excited about Star Wars, so you can have some new movies for your generation too. I'm a little old and probably the perfect age for a Phantom Menace fan, in that I was about 16 when when Phantom Menace came out. And I think the sweet spot might be closer to like 10 to 12, maybe 8 to 12, somewhere in. But I saw it for the first time. My sister is 4 years older than me, and she had been away at college for the year, and like a super cool older sister got home probably only a week or so before it and said, I'll take you to opening night, which was a real treat. And we bought tickets to our small theater in New Hampshire, probably like the worst possible technical specifications. George Lucas would not have been pleased, but we had a fantastic time. And I remember specifically, I ended up sitting between my older sister, Sarah, and just by chance, our high school band director, who sat beside me. And he was always very cool, fun band director. And all I remember specifically is I think when Jar Jar trips in the parade at the very end, he just kind of gave a, "Ugh, all right, I'm over these guys," kind of attitude, which was maybe my first indication that the Gungans were going to be controversial. And then, my sister took me many times over that summer, and I think I ended up seeing it 12 times in the theater.
Wow.
But that includes like in the fall, it went to her college and they played it, in the small campus theater space and things like that. And so I went and visited her and saw it a couple times that way too. So not 12 times a month or anything like that, but really spread throughout the summer.
What a cool older sister you have. Do you still do things with her Star Wars wise? Do you guys still share, different premieres or, special events or anything?
It's funny because it was a time when I think she could tell I needed a little guidance, and so I think that makes her even more of a hero. Is it wasn't her thing, and it wasn't going to be her forever thing, but she could tell I needed, somebody to take to them to the show. And the real heroic move, since we're talking about 1999, I will say she drove me to Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC every week for 4 weeks and helped me collect all 12 of the cups,
Nice.
including a very stressful week when Pizza Hut in my New Hampshire town, they gave out the Mace Windu topper with the Nuke Gunray bottom. And we had to wait a whole week to be sure that they then gave out the Nuke Gunray top with the Mace Windu bottom. So I had the whole set. So
Oh
yes,
my
a
goodness.
very good set of memories. And she'll still text me when there's big Star Wars news, just because she knows I'm thinking about it. But it was probably the closest we ever were growing up is that summer. And thanks to Phantom Menace.
That's fantastic. So the big question is, do you still have those toppers?
I do. They are ready to
Nice.
go in a nice scrub in the dishwasher. I'm hoping to sneak one into AMC with me. If I can say
Oh,
in
for sure.
May, I'll buy the large soda, but I want to fill up this Jar Jar cup. I'm hoping the disaffected teenagers will just not care and say, whatever you want, we go for it.
I love this plan. This is
I do too. I approve this message. Big time.
Okay, so I have an off-topic follow-up question to that. Since you were growing up in the dark times and you didn't get to see these movies when they were the original trilogy when it was in theaters, did you get a chance to go to theater and see the special editions when they were released back in I guess 97?
I did. So that again was like another sign. It was like, oh, you're a Star Wars fan. You deserve to see them on the big screen. We'll put them out for you. Thank you so much, Lucasfilm. And my best friend growing up, his birthday in February, mine is in March. So Empire Strikes Back was his birthday party. Return of the Jedi was mine, but then they delayed it a week, so I had to change the birthday party to go a week later when they delayed Return of the Jedi. And we all just went together. All my buddies went in January to Star Wars, so I did manage to see all three, but just once each. And then it was, I think, until a celebration that to see like the big screen projected version of those films again. And so I have a rule with my Boston friend here in town that I say, if Star Wars is in the theater, we're going. It doesn't matter which one or how many times we've seen it. It's just an occasion. Even if it's not your favorite one, you got to see it big and
Yeah,
with a group.
absolutely. Love
Definitely.
that.
Yeah, and those movies, special editions each one of them wasn't in the theaters that long, so it was not like there was a lot of opportunity to see them multiple times. Especially if you were in high school at the time, that would have been hard to get away to do that. So, Okay, well, the next question we have is, what is your favorite scene from The Phantom Menace?
Well, as listeners may not be aware, but anybody who follows me on social media is aware, I'm an Obi guy. So for me, it's really which scene is Obi-Wan the best in, and
Mhm.
I think I have to go, just even if it seems obvious, the kind of opening of the Duel of the Fates, from when Darth Maul ignites that second blade, kind of through into the big room as they kind of battle across the hangar. I'd love to say like all the way through till the end, but that's really stretching the definition of a scene. But that opening is so fun, and even though the Darth Maul blade had been shown in the trailer and so on, it's such a kind of chill-inducing moment, and something we really didn't see in the original trilogy, the level of choreography and style. So I think that's I'm sure you both do the same thing. You have Star Wars on in the background, or it's playing
Mhm.
on well, I was gonna say TNT. I'm not sure they have the license anymore, but it's playing on cable, and you just every once in a while there comes that moment you have to stop and really watch, even though it's been on as background noise, and that's one for me. Always sit down and watch the start of the duel.
Mhm. Excellent. So I have to ask, was it all about Obi-Wan from the beginning? Were you a huge Obi-Wan Kenobi fan going into the Phantom Menace, or was it kind of something that evolved, and so now every time you see it, that's the character that you gravitate toward?
I think it is actually probably Phantom Menace in particular that made me really fall in love with Obi-Wan. My unusual original trilogy story is that I saw Empire, then Jedi, and A New Hope, I think almost a year or two later. So
Wow.
I didn't really connect with old Ben because he was a ghost and it wasn't a
Mhm.
character I really knew from the two I'd seen and kind of grown to love first. But then, seeing Phantom Menace, and Ewan is so charismatic, even in his kind of smallish role, and just felt like the key to this saga all of a sudden. I think that's what drew me to him. Um, these recordings have been destroyed, so I'm making no promises. But my friends and I had a video camera in high school, and we made a reenactment of the Duel of the Fates, and I was assigned the role of Obi-Wan. So that's probably what really cemented it for me. And
Awesome.
then as that continued, I live in fear that those tapes will somehow make it to the internet and I will be canceled forever, especially if my students found them. Uh, but no, I think it would be more akin to the Star Wars kid, right? Just kind of fun, goofy kids having fun. But it's that's what cemented it, and the collection grew from there, and nearly broke the house when the Obi-Wan Kenobi show came out, and we got so much merchandise
Oh,
related to
yeah.
him.
Oh, yeah, that's fantastic. So you already answered what is normally our third question, and we were just talking about that.
Mhm.
Who is your favorite character? So obviously Obi-Wan. But do you have a secondary character that you kind of really like, or that was introduced in the Phantom Menace specifically that you appreciate most?
I think the kind of easy answer on that one is Qui-Gon, and he's such a unique and special Jedi. But because that's obvious, I just want to say Queen Amidala Padme. I mean, I think in hindsight, it's really brave of George to kind of focus so much of the movie on a young woman who is a queen and is a leader. That's just not a character type we got in 1999, and
Mhm.
we should have. I'm certainly not saying it was a good thing we didn't have a lot of characters like that, but I think Padme and the Queen have grown in my estimation, and part of that is the E.K. Johnston books, which were really good at fleshing out that story a little bit more. But I think in initial viewings of the movie, it's kind of tricky to figure out exactly what's going on, especially now that Keira Knightley's famous in her own way. So you're like, well, I know these two actresses aren't the same person, and
Mhm.
but the voice change and so on. But I would say I will hold back some of my comments because we obviously have a really good Padme scene in today's discussion. But I think I've since 1990, and that's probably the character that's become much more highly regarded in my mind because she's fantastic. And obviously the costumes and everything are spectacular in addition to that. And I think Dennis, it was you who said last Phantom Menace segment that like you see Natalie Portman today and you're just like, my God, like you were so young when Phantom Menace came out. I mean, obviously beautiful her whole life, but it's like you see her in the clips we have for today's discussion. You're like, oh, she's very young and not 14, but believably 14.
Yeah, and quick aside, you mentioned all of the different outfits that Padme wears, and I remember just that hitting me at the time thinking, gosh, like Leia had one outfit for the entire movie, and then here's Padme, changing outfits like every 5 minutes it seemed like. But it was just amazing to see all of those, all the wardrobe and Trisha Bigger and the whole crew that came up with all of the amazing costumes.
Well, and to steal the parlance of my students, probably inappropriately, I'll say each one is a sleigh, right? I mean, there's no bad outfit, no bad costume in the mix.
Yes. Good
Well,
usage.
I want to do one last side question before we get into this discussion. And this actually comes out of our last episode and then a Instagram post that you put. But you have all 4 covers for the novelization of this book. That is, in my estimation, it's still an impressive addition to your collection there.
It is. It was so funny. I loved Kara saying, well, it's almost like a mood ring or something of which cover did you have and what does that say about you? But I think what probably happened, because I think I was working by 16. I probably had to be to afford all those movie tickets. But I certainly didn't have a lot of disposable income. So I have to imagine my parents had just saved their credit card on Amazon, and I full on abused that to get all 4 covers. And I actually can't tell you which one I read that first summer. I'm sure I only read the once. I don't know if I would have picked Obi-Wan, even though that's my current favorite. But it's funny because they almost, I went through a kind of fallow period in my fandom, probably my later years of college and just as a young professional. And I do remember one yard sale where I put all 4 out, and it was like on a table of like any book for $1. And I really hesitated before putting them down, but I put 3 of them on there and kept the Obi-Wan. And thankfully, there were no takers. So I still have all 4 today, which I do have a warm place on my shelves for them because it's such a nice little microcosm of just what 1999 was like and the crazy onslaught of that merchandise.
Oh yeah, that's extraordinary. I love that story. And they all look like they're in such great shape too.
I cannot say that was deliberate, but I think they spent a long time in a nice dry basement, and that I know some fans have the opposite story where their basements weren't dry and ended up losing things, but thankfully that mine have stayed safe.
All right.
Good deal.
Well, then let's go ahead and get into this segment. And for all of you following along on your podcatcher, we are discussing the portion of the movie that goes from 31 minutes 41 seconds to 44 minutes and 13 seconds or thereabouts. And it starts off with Watto's shop. Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, Padme, and R2-D2 enter the shop. And Qui-Gon tells Watto that he's looking for parts, specifically for a J-type Nubian. And they got lots of that. He calls Anakin in to watch the shop. And then Qui-Gon looks at Jar Jar and says, "Do not touch anything," to which Jar Jar sticks his tongue out at him from behind. So, well, let's just go into the next scene because then we'll get more of an opportunity to really get first impressions of Watto in a second. This is a big one. This is our, I don't even know if you want to call it a meet cute, because we've got a teenager and 8-year-old boy, Anakin and Padme meet for the first time, and Anakin asks Padme if she is an angel. And she's what? What are you talking about? Calls him funny little boy. Talks about how Anakin talks about how he's heard about them from traders and style pilots. They're supposed to be on the moon's Viego. And then, he says someday he's going to fly away from this place. And we get into the whole backstory of how he came to be in Watto's service, because they were initially sold to Gardulla the Hutt. She lost them betting on the pod races. And this kind of catches Padme off guard. She says, "You're a slave?" And he responds, "I'm a person, and my name is Anakin." So, Greg, what do you think about this scene? From the meeting of Anakin and Padme for the first time, your first impressions of Anakin, and I'm not sure naivete is the right word for Padme, but the kind of surprise she has with encountering a slave in this scene.
Well, and I'll just sidebar to say, oh my goodness, you all gave me so many first appearances in these 10 minutes. I feel very lucky to have the moment Anakin first appears, and among many other characters, as we'll discuss. My thoughts on returning to this scene have to start with Jake. And, I think we all know that he's had his struggles, but most recently we got a really hopeful message from his family that he's doing better, and that he still is a really deep Star Wars fan. So watching this for tonight, that really resonated with me, that he's been on a tough journey, but that he still has that love and that joy somewhere in him. And what is Anakin in this scene except just full of hope and joy and kind of he believes that angels can be real. He believes he'll get out of this hobble in this slave's life. And so I think unfair things were said about him at the time, but he, like these other actors, were doing what they were asked to do, and I think he did it really well. So my thoughts, well, now I'm paraphrasing, but my thoughts dwelled on him, not on my mother, but on Jake Lloyd as I rewatched these scenes.
Nice.
And how about you, Jay? What'd you think of Padme's response to him in this scene?
Well, again, Greg, I'm sure you've probably heard this story by listening to some of the other episodes, but I was 29 and pregnant with my first child when I got to see this in the movie theater. And so for me, embarking on the journey of thinking about becoming a mother, this really kind of hit me as, here's this little boy that we know grows up to be Darth Vader. And here he is, just so wide-eyed and so innocent, and seeing Padme and just completely being mesmerized by her beauty. And, he obviously had an amazing relationship with his mom, and they were very close, as we definitely end up finding out. But his mom was really the role model for him. And so to see another woman that kind of embodied that beauty, both physically and just the fact that she was so kind to him, is just something that I always treasured about this particular moment. And, and of course, just the idea that this little boy is just completely enamored with this young girl was just so sweet.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out for me in this scene is Padme's reaction to everything that's going on. And, you're a funny little boy type of thing. She's never met anyone like Anakin in this situation. And he's, he comes right out, like, "Are you an angel?" And then he's talking about his ability as a pilot and how he's good at building stuff. That carries through later parts of this segment as well. And then, he's just nonchalantly talking about how he and his mom are property of Watto, paraphrasing obviously, and they were prior property of Gardulla the Hutt, and she lost them betting on the pod races. And Padme's just like, "You're a slave?" Like, this is astounding to her that she could run into a slave. This is not the world she came from on Naboo. And so just the I think, God love George, but I think with a little bit better direction, perhaps that could have been a bigger, more obvious part of the movie, just how she's stepping out of the world that she's known as she's fighting for her world back home. And she's encountering things like this. We'll see it here in this scene. She's encountering something brand new to her in Tatooine, and then something even far different when she gets to Coruscant later. But the reaction she has, and then Anakin's response, I'm a person and my name is Anakin. And I think that also is an understated, clever portion of this conversation, in that, he sees himself, I'm a slave right now, but that doesn't take away from my humanity right now. That this is, and as you were pointing out, Greg, he does believe that he will rise above the situation at some point, even though there's no clear pathway out for him right now. So let's move on to outdoors, out back. Watto is showing Qui-Gon around the parts that he has in the back. The pit droids are working, moving things from here to there. And Qui-Gon's explaining how he needs a T-14 hyperdrive generator. Watto asks him how he's going to pay for all this, to which Qui-Gon says Republic credits. And Watto's like, not about that. He's not going to accept these things. And this is when Qui-Gon tries the Jedi mind trick and says, Republic credits will do fine. And it doesn't work. Watto asks, you think you're a Jedi of some kind, waving your hand like that? And his response is, I'm a Toydarian. Mind tricks don't work on me, only money. And then he points out that the fix that Qui-Gon's in because no one else has a T-14 that he's going to need. Okay, so Greg, what are your first impressions of Watto from this scene?
He's a fantastic Pizza Hut cup. Actually, I think he's Taco Bell, but I think Watto is a really striking design, and in real Star Wars fashion, I've loved. I think it's Pablo Hidalgo's job to explain. There's kind of a helium balloon in his belly, so that's why the wings don't have to flap quite as fast as they probably should have to, and so on. But I think Watto and someone else we'll meet in these 10 minutes really exemplify the vision George had to push beyond aliens that are obviously performers in suits, right? Like, in the OT, it's yes, we can have little people for Ewoks and really big people for Wookiees, but they're mostly kind of humanoid shapes. Really push out of that with a character like Watto is really striking. And I think when you look at the 25 years later, the actual rendering of him looks pretty good. Looks better than a lot of other CG movies you see still today. It speaks to the kind of craftsmanship they put into him. And I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that some people say this is a little problematic. His voice is, kind of questionable and maybe falls into stereotypes. But just as a blue alien on screen kind of hacking, he's really fun and something that not a lot of people would put on screen through till today. I will say I get a big kick out of the fact that, Qui-Gon is asking for parts for his 327 J Nubian, and then Watto responds with a I believe a T-14, and those are just all old-fashioned Star Wars numbers, right? I mean, that's the docking bay on the Death Star is 327, and then it's just a little off from Luke's T-16 Skyhopper. So I do like those little moments that remind you, George just has these weird little quirks he likes to repeat like that. So even though I guess that means the juxtaposition is there, we have the very new in Watto and the kind of familiar that lets you know this is still Star Wars.
Jay, what did you think about Watto?
I've always loved Watto. He is one of those that just tickles the funny bone. He's just eccentric and he's whimsical, and he just fits so well with everything that Star Wars is, with the creatures and just the extravagance of these different types of alien species and whatnot. And I smile every time I think about Watto. And, even though he's got the flies flying around him, and of course, when my boys were little, that was always the big thing, Watto's so gross, but he's so funny, because little boys love gross things. So, so that's why I think I kind of fell in love with Watto. But, the whole thing about how he says, I'm a Toydarian, my tricks don't work on me, only money. Is it true that Toydarians are really immune to any kind of force suggestion, or is it just because Watto was so stubborn that he just kind of put himself into that category as being, all about the money and show me the money, and that, that was his big MO kind of thing?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a conversation topic that I wanted to get into a little bit. Just the Qui-Gon's attempt to use the Force suggestion anyways, the mind trick, which is to get what he wants at the expense of someone else's desires in this case. There seems to be a little bit of an ethical problem for me when it comes down to that. It's often said that mind tricks, they only work on the weak-minded. We've heard that plenty of times in Star Wars in this case. I've also noticed that it's not too hard to use a mind trick on somebody to get them to do what they really want to do. And in the case, and they just may have some other obstacle in the way. And, we've seen that a number of times over Star Wars here. But Watto does not want to accept a currency that is not really of any value here to him. And that's all Qui-Gon has. And so he's trying to push the issue there. I'm going to ask you both about what you think about that. Greg, I'll let you go first.
It's very resonant with the current comics run. There was just a joke. There's a trial going on, and a lawyer floats the defense of, my client was under a Jedi mind trick, and you should let him off, which is a lie in this particular comics run. But it makes you think about the legal ramifications of a universe where the Jedi mind trick exists, which I'm sure you'll be able to speak to better. But this moment, and then one is not in my 10 minutes, but is coming up involving a chance cube, I think are very questionable moments of Qui-Gon's behavior, right? What we understand about Qui-Gon, and the novelization actually tacks this onto the end of the dinner scene that we'll be talking about a little later, but he's very attuned to the living force and is kind of ignoring what's called the cosmic force or the unifying force. And so immediately it seems like that could easily become his justification, right? Like I was following the will of the living force and had to follow through on these to get the queen where she needed to go to complete the mission or so on, so it would be justified. I think there's probably also a little bit of Jedi morality gray area in that Watto is a slave owner and doesn't seem to be an upstanding businessman. We know by Attack of the Clones he meets with some kind of financial ruin, maybe stemming from his gambling problems. So I think maybe George is kind of hand-waving some of that by saying, oh, he's not really that good a guy, so it's okay if Qui-Gon does that. And then what comes to mind is that Jabba the Hutt also senses the mind trick in Return of the Jedi. So it does seem like the criminally powerful, or maybe the motivated by money. I guess, well, Watto says it, right? Mind tricks do not work on me, only money. So that's also could explain Jabba knowing kind of being able to work around Jedi mind tricks. But I think you're right to point out that it's a kind of questionable move from Qui-Gon.
What's your take, Jay?
Well, Qui-Gon has always been, I mean, just from the very beginning, you even hear things from Obi-Wan saying, don't go against the Council Master, not again. So we just kind of get that feeling from the get-go that Qui-Gon just sort of follows his own path when it comes to being a Jedi, and that, yes, he is, ethically, obviously amazing, but that there's also that kind of thin little line that, if he feels that it could be justified, that perhaps he will kind of cross that line just a little bit. So, this is our first indication of that. And then Dennis, as you pointed out as well with the chance cubes and kind of messing around with the Force just a little bit instead of letting the will of the Force take over.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wrote these notes like 4 days ago, and I've been thinking about this scene a lot. And it also doesn't help that I'm reading The Living Force by John Jackson Miller right now, which talks quite a bit about the living force versus the cosmic force. And I don't know, I'm trying to come up with the best defense for this. And Greg, I think you're on to something, which is he's got a mission to do. He needs to get the queen to Coruscant, and it's for the greater good. And doing something this is really, in the grand scheme of things, a minor evil. It's not like he's going around robbing people. Well, you want to give me your fortune or anything like that. And at the end of the day, okay, Watto doesn't have the currency he has, but it's not like he's left with absolutely nothing. He just doesn't have as much of a value he wants. So I guess you could work some sort of a defense up for that. And Qui-Gon's truly desperate in this case. He's, there are high stakes in this situation. It's not just a matter of inconvenience. It is a matter of people dying on Naboo. So I don't know that I have a clear answer to that, other than it's just as much as I like Qui-Gon, is like, that's kind of a maverick move, man. Okay. So, and to the other point you're making, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna, and that resonance too of kind of in Star Wars, it's like the core versus the outer rim. I think it reads kind of in our society like urban versus rural in some ways, right? And this reaction of, well, Republic credits don't work out here. I need something more real. And I think Qui-Gon has just a little bit of that arrogance of, the Republic is how things are supposed to be run. The core has it all right. So he's underestimating Watto and kind of being like, oh, I can trick this guy. He doesn't really know what's going on either. So I do think that would probably be Watto describe this interaction. And I think there's some nugget of truth to it.
Yeah. And the other part of that is, like, in the example you brought up with Jabba, Luke is trying to use a mind trick on him, but that is the absolute last thing Jabba wants to do. He does not want to give up Han Solo. He does not want to do any of this for nothing. Meanwhile, when Obi-Wan's mind tricking a stormtrooper in the streets of Mos Eisley, the stormtrooper's just doing a job. He doesn't really care. It's not like he's got a lot on the line if he lets them go without, it's easy to, these aren't the droids. Oh, okay. They're not the droids. The big flaw in that argument might be what Rey does with the stormtrooper in The Force Awakens. You're going to release me from these restraints, and you're going to leave your blaster behind, and all those type of things. But maybe that guy was just especially weak-minded. So we'll have to talk about that. So that's a whole other conversation. We'll put a pin in that for some other day. So back inside,
but that was James Bond, right?
True.
That was James Bond.
Yeah, okay.
It was indeed.
So back in Watto's shop, Anakin is explaining that he's good at building things, and it's how he's managed to last so long. I kind of feel like that's him just trying to impress Padmé when it comes down to things. But meanwhile, Qui-Gon kind of storms in there and says, we're leaving. And Jar Jar has been juggling in the background. And this comes right off the heels of him having that moment with the pit droid where he clumsily activated and it ends up kicking him where I would rather not be kicked. And then Anakin tells him to push the nose. Anakin and Padmé say goodbye to each other. They're glad to have met each other. And Watto delivers this line. It's like, outworlders, they think we know nothing. And Anakin says, I don't know, I thought they were nice. And Watto's response to that is like, okay, clean the racks and you can go home. To which we get the first of a couple different wonderful yippies. So, well, I'll open the floor on this before I share some of my observations and ask a question. But what did this scene tell you, Greg?
The resonant moment in it is Padmé's kindness, shouting, I was happy to have met you, or I was glad to have met you. And Anakin responds with this really boyish, like, oh, I was glad to meet you too. And it's so genuine, but it's like he needs to prove that he, almost that he felt it more or something, right? It's a really kind of forceful response in this kind of lovely way. With that. And I did delve a little into the novel just to see the scene. And it's there's a big difference here that I thought was really striking. I think when you see these difference between the novelization and the film, it often is because the author is given an earlier version of the script. And Anakin in this little piece of scene actually says to Padmé, I'm going to marry you someday.
Oh, yeah.
And Padmé laughs it off as like, sure you are, strange little boy, because it's very forward. And I'm going to first say good at it. I think that would have been really hard to get right in this context, and it would have felt very false in some way. I really love that energy is still there where he says, I'm one of you almost, right? I'm part of your society and your world. I just need to be, I just need to be pulled out of this to join it.
Yeah, I think for me, I know with Anakin, he's a boy. And so even now, thinking back to when my own boys were that age, they wanted to look tough. They wanted to look like they knew what they were talking about. They wanted to look like they were older than they were, that they were more adult than they were. And so I think that's where, when Anakin was talking about, I'm good at building things, it's how I've lasted so long. It's almost like him, being able to say, yeah, look at me, I fit right in, and I'm cool, and I'm good, and that type of thing. So, I just think that that's just kind of a basic need that all kids have, and especially trying to impress Padme, as y'all said too. And but as far as, it's glad to have known you, glad to have met you too. Did he really think he was ever going to see her again at that point? And I often wonder what was kind of going through his mind, like, we're, we just met, and now she's leaving again. But I'm sure he's probably had a lot of encounters like that before, just because Tatooine and Mos Espa are both very well traveled in terms of, outworlders and people coming through there, on their way to other places, whether it be from the outer rim towards the core, or vice versa, to escape.
Yeah, it's I like this scene for a couple different reasons. One, because there's that goodbye. I forgot completely that he made that comment in the book about, who's going to marry her someday. I do like, just kind of, to your point, Jay, just the, the bravado, him just trying, there's a bit of showing going on. First, like I said earlier, with the, I've always been good building things. That's how I managed to last so long. Cause he may be in the backwater of Tatooine, but he is under the protection of his mother, and he does have food on the table and stuff like that. It's not like he's out there fighting off the wolves or something like that. But Tuscans maybe. But anyway, the other thing that stood out to me about this scene is just there's a hint of affection from Watto towards Anakin in this, and I think for all of Watto's flaws, when it comes to his greed and his gambling, he legitimately cares about Anakin. And this will come up again, not within this segment that we're talking about, but when it comes to the podrace later as well. But just giving him the afternoon off after all this, it's like, yep, clean the ranch, you can go. And just and then we get the yippee again there. And so it's just kind of a and Watto comes in, and talks to him, not necessarily like an equal, but and someone in a similar standing. It's like, the outworlders, it's like someone he would confide in, that they think we know nothing. And then Anakin is comfortable enough in this relationship to say, I don't know, I thought they were nice. And that didn't merit a harsh reprisal from Watto, which is, clean this up and you can go home. You guys agree, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think there is in there. You're right. And that reading of that moment where, at least in this interaction, they're on one side and the party of Jedi and Prince, or excuse me, Jedi and Queens are on the other side, does show, I think you're right, that there's value to that relationship in Watto's eyes. And I was thinking a lot about how, even in 1999, I was doing the math of, well, he was willing to part Shmi for the pod before, so he should want to now. But I find that moment later where Qui-Gon says, like, well, Watto wouldn't have it. I think there's affection there, right, for Shmi, and he has lost Anakin. So to build off of what you're saying, that it was affection there, he's experiencing a loss, and not just a pure financial terms loss, but really a loss of someone he cared about. I think reads correctly. And it's hard to recognize that character in the context of this movie is, does own human beings, and seemingly quite a few, or at least these two. So, you want to dismiss that, but I do think it does feel like the relationship is much different than we would anticipate it being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Watto really is a softie. I mean, you could tell right away, and it's a different type of master slave kind of relationship, I think, between what's going on there. And even later on, you see that with when Anakin comes back in Attack of the Clones, and Watto is almost like a proud papa. He's like, "Hey, Jedi, what do you know?" And he's just like, he's kind of so proud of Anakin and happy that he was able to, follow his dreams and make those dreams come true.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay, so moving on from there, we get a shot of the Queen's ship. Qui-Gon has calmed Obi-Wan, asking if there's anything on board that they can sell or barter with, and Obi-Wan It's like, the Queen's wardrobe, maybe.
I love that
Yeah,
line.
nothing really the amount you're talking about there. And and then you get the shot of Qui-Gon. He ends the call, and he's like, okay, well, we'll figure this out. And then Jar Jar doesn't want to go back on the streets because no again, the beings hereabouts co-wazy. We said be wobbed, uncrunched. And Qui-Gon wisely points out, not likely, we don't have anything of value, which is what our problem is in the first place. I just, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because we still have some significant scenes to get through. But I do enjoy Qui-Gon's patience with Jar Jar beyond their initial meeting when, Jar Jar nearly got himself killed and Qui-Gon had to tackle him in order to save his life from the Trade Federation tanks. It's just he's not he's not harsh with Jar Jar. It is it's a gentle. It's like, Jar Jar is having a very crazy day. He's been exiled. He's nearly killed by the Trade Federation in a swamp. He gets taken back home where he is nearly punished, as Boston Ass wants to say. Panics going through the core, gets on a starship, nearly dies again trying to rid the blockade, and now they're on Tatooine. It's all the day in the life of a Jedi, but for Jar Jar, this is 1,000 times worse than anything he's ever had to experience. But unless either one of you have a comment on that, I'm just going to move forward to the next scene here. They're wandering down the street. Jar Jar spots a critter that he wants to eat at a vendor stall and sticks his tongue out and starts eating it. The proprietor shows up and says it's going to cost him 7 whoopee. Jar Jar spits it out. It lands in Sebulba's soup. And so, Greg, we get the introduction of another new character, Sebulba. He jumps up, knocks Jar Jar over, and is threatening to hit him when Anakin shows up and starts talking trash and says, Jar Jar is a big time outworlder, and he'd hate to see Sebulba get diced before they get to race again. Sebulba says, that race is going to be the end of Anakin, and if you weren't a slave, you'd squash him right now. Anakin again is laying on the bravado for, as someone who's got to be 16 or 17 by this way he talks. It'd be a pity if you had to pay for me. So
Love that.
And then Anakin explains who Sebulba is to Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon says that Jar Jar was heading into some trouble. All right, so first thoughts on Sebulba. Go ahead, Greg.
It's such a fun character design. Again, I think both of these are Terry Whitlatch, who did a lot of the creature biological designs for Phantom Menace. Apologies if I'm misattributing that, but I think of Doug Chang as the starship guy and Terry as the creature design. And I again just love the whole way in which this can't be somebody in a costume, that this is walking on the hands and having the feet have the kind of prehensile fingers and so on. And so he's he at times literally like a mustache twirling villain. I guess it's not a mustache, it's like tendrils of some kind, but and I think Star Wars is great when it works in that register. I love debating the machinations of Palpatine and all that, but sometimes you just need, like, he's a bully, and we're gonna stand up to a bully and watch a bully get his comeuppance, and that works really well. And the beauty of making it that simple is then Anakin is the type of guy who will step in and interrupt a bully and stand up and defend the innocent or quasi-innocent of Jar Jar. And so I think we get some fun, but it really does serve the character well.
For sure. And, as far as Sebulba goes, again, like you said, Greg, he's just this amazing creature, just yet another creature that we get to meet. And, from the mind of George Lucas and working off of that. And I've always loved the creatures. I just thought that they were so great. But, to your point, Dennis, when you were talking about the fact that, Anakin was talking to Sebulba like he's like a 16-year-old, it'd be a pity if you had to pay for me. I mean, it kind of reminds me, basically, this is their playground. You know what I mean? And so for the whole culture there on Tatooine and Mos Espa and where Anakin lives and where he is basically experiencing all of his things that he does with pod racing and that type of thing. It's his playground. And Sebulba is, in fact, as you said, Greg, his bully. And so, you have these little interactions, and obviously Sebulba is much older than Anakin is. So, I mean, you can't really look at the age differences as being like a playground kind of a thing, but yet it is. I mean, the dynamic that's there, and you right away get that feeling that these two really, they do know each other, and there is this rivalry there, and it's setting that up for the future, which I think is cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the last thing on this scene is, again, it's just kind of what I was talking about earlier with the way Qui-Gon is with Jar Jar. And, he thanks Anakin, and then he points out to Jar Jar, it's like, unless the boy's right, you were headed in trouble. And he's reminding Jar Jar, you're being reckless at this point. And, stay focused here. And, and Jar Jar's response is like, but Misa do nothing. And that speaks a bit to the immaturity of Jar Jar. It's like, no, you took something that didn't belong to you and it escalated. So, be careful. The overreaction from Sebulba was not your fault, but if you'd been a bit more cautious to begin with, we wouldn't be in this place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
what you say in both those great comments about Jar Jar and Qui-Gon, it's a good reminder that Obi-Wan, when Jar first shows up, says, "What's this?" Right? So dismissively of Qui-Gon, of Jar Jar and Qui-Gon's kind of acceptance of him. And I noted again in the novel that Qui-Gon and Watto, in the scene we already discussed, they refer to Jar Jar as that, not him, but that. And I thought that it's so dehumanizing. I really like that was kind of trimmed away. And you're saying that the replacement is Qui-Gon valuing and seeing the humanity in Jar Jar. We'll put humanity in quotes, and
Sure.
and it does. I think it tells you a lot about Qui-Gon there and his ability to really embody a lot of Jedi values.
Good point. Okay, so we get a brief shot of the outskirts where the Queen ship is parked. Obi-Wan and Panaka are outside. A sandstorm is brewing. This is our first hint of the sandstorm, and Panaka is notified they're getting a message from home. We'll get back to that in just a bit as we get to the extension of that scene. In Mos Espa, Qui-Gon begins to sense that the sandstorm is coming. Anakin gives him some food or something that he purchased from a vendor. And then this is when Anakin notices Qui-Gon's lightsaber for the first time. The vendor warns Anakin that a sandstorm is coming because her bones are beginning to ache. And Anakin asks if they have shelter, and then tells them that they're never going to make it back to their ship in time. So he's going to take them home. I think these scenes really blend right into with what happens at Anakin and Shmi's home. But I want to give you each the opportunity to comment if you had anything that stood out to you from that.
Anything for you, Greg?
I will say, well, I was going to say this is a silly one, but it is probably my most quoted line from Phantom Menace is whenever there's a storm front mapped out on our weather map, I turn to my wife and say, "Storm's coming, Annie. I can feel it in my bones."
Nice.
And my wife rolls her eyes after 25 years of this, roughly. But I do have a soft spot for Jira. And just by way of a couple little tiny trivia points, we're recording on April 11th, and this anniversary of the passing of the actress who played Jira. I happened to see on social media today. So, she's got a small role. I always think of Bonnie Burton, who used to work at StarWars.com. She wanted to pitch a Charlie's Angels show of, I believe it was Jira, Shmi, and Jocasta Nu. Or maybe I think instead of Shmi, it was the Cantina owner from the holiday special, B. Arthur's character.
Oh my gosh.
As well. So yeah.
I like
That's
it.
fantastic.
For that.
I would totally
just
watch
because
that.
I don't want the internet. Yeah, I would too, in a heartbeat. Just because I don't want the internet to get mad at us, we shouldn't neglect that in the scene Sebulba and Jar Jar's confrontation, Quinlan Vos was sitting at one of the tables.
Oh, yes.
In that cafe, which is, I believe, technically it's the character whose look inspired Quinlan Vos more than Quinlan Vos himself, but it is worth noting.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember that was such, one of those things, almost like, Wilro Hood. It's somebody in the background that fans are like, oh my gosh, who is that? And what is their backstory? And da 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 da. And I remember going to Celebration in 2006, and there was someone that was cosplaying Quinlan Vos, but no one really knew who he was at that point, which I just think is so cool.
I want to say, I remember back when Quinlan Vos was breaking out as a Jedi in the Dark Horse comics at the time, one of the creators of that comic had that screenshot on there was a website somewhere. And he said, one of these characters is an undercover Jedi. Can you figure out which one? And that was the tease for the whole thing. But gosh, that was so long ago. I'm going to dig through my Dark Horse comic collection and see if I can find that introduction of him as a Jedi. But
Wow,
yeah,
that's awesome.
good call there, Greg.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. One thing I have to point out really quickly, because I know we're already kind of running long on time here, is, once again, just the fact that Anakin was very well liked. He was you could just tell that people really kind of admired him. They respected him. They liked him. Like you said, Greg, with Jira, you better get home, Annie. My bones are aching, kind of thing. So it was this whole culture that was built around, once again, this little community. So you have like the playground bully, and then you have the sage, the mentor, kind of thing, and everyone kind of knew everyone. And so that's the kind of background that Anakin came from. And I always think about that, it's just such a wholesome kind of a background. Even though he was a slave, I mean, he really did have people that he encountered and that cared for him, and that there was some interesting dynamics going on with.
Indeed. Okay, so we get to Anakin and Shmi's home, the Skywalker homestead. They fight through the sandstorm to get there. Anakin announces he's home, like any kid does when they walk through the front door. I'm home, loudly responsible. Shmi emerges from a back room, and Qui-Gon introduces himself. And as he does this, I love this, and they have not gone in and fixed it to this day. Natalie Portman standing behind him mouths, "I am Qui-Gon Jinn. I'm Qui-Gon Jinn." At the same time he says it, and they.
I need to catch that.
I remember the first time someone pointed that out. It's 20 some odd years ago, and I look for it every single time. It makes me smile. I don't know why. It just does.
Oh my gosh. I did not know that. I'm going to have to do that. Now I'm never going to be able to unsee that, which
no, you won't.
So
just watch. She just kind of looks up and she mouths, "I'm Qui-Gon Jinn."
Oh my gosh. I love it.
So we get to Anakin's room. So we got a brief introduction to Shmi. We'll learn a little bit more about her in a second. And this is where we meet Threepio. Yeah, you were right, Greg. There's a whole lot of characters introduced in this scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's lying there without coverings. Anakin's explaining how he built a protocol droid to help his mother. And Anakin tells Padmé that how he's going to show her his pod racer that he built when the storm's over. And Threepio can't see to begin with because one of his eyes is missing. And then when he gets up, he notes that the floor is unstable. And then he gets to meet R2-D2, which is one of my favorite moments. I don't know necessarily my favorite scene, but one of my favorite moments from this entire movie, because the iconic duo of Threepio and R2-D2, this is where they got their start. And R2 teases him by telling him he's naked because his parts are showing. So, okay. This took me some getting used to, but it's actually a look that I actually kind of like, because I don't know. I like the way that this really highlights that C-3PO is in fact a droid, and not to dehumanize him, but just because, yeah, the casings and the coverings are neat, but this is just an extra step in design for me. But Greg, what do you think about the presentation of C-3PO in this movie?
Oh, it is such a good moment. And, there are a few of these kind of iconic moments of meetings of characters. The other one is Anakin Skywalker meet Obi-Wan Kenobi, which a future guest will discuss. But I loved watching it this time. John Williams, and it seems silly to praise John Williams because, also water is good, right? Like, but, it's so great that he gives it just this little fanfare. It's subtle, but he doesn't let the moment pass without commenting on it musically, that this is as iconic as you think it is. And we'll just have this little beat to celebrate that. I remember in 1999, this was on the list of complaints. Oh, you're telling me Darth Vader made C-3PO when he was a little, and I never understood why that's a complaint. I think it's so fun, and writers and comic artists since have gotten to kind of play with that, and there's an iconic I think it's a what if of Vader holding up 3PO's head in Cloud City and really thinking about, could this be, my 3PO? And the look is great. I mean, I think maybe a lot of the complaints came from Tony Daniels, who didn't get to be on set and just got to provide the voice later. But I love the read of the 3PO line. I'm not sure this floor is entirely stable, as he kind of jankily walks toward R2D2, and it works, and it's really fun. I still think, there could be more stories about both sides for this, but I love this moment where it's like, this is where the story of Star Wars kind of really gets going, because now we've got our duo together.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah, because, as you mentioned, Dennis, they're just so iconic together. And, just getting to see, for me personally, I love origin stories, I love backstories. So to get to see Threepio in the raw, so to speak, was just such a delight. And I remember just smiling from ear to ear and then thinking to myself, thank the maker. Now we know who the maker is, and just
Mhm.
that kind of like aha moment, which was so great. But I just and once again, Anakin telling Padme very matter of factly, yeah, I built him to help out my mom, like it's no big deal, like, yeah, I built this whole droid.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And to the point you're making, Greg, about people being complaining that Vader made Anakin, I actually love that because to me it lends to the entire mythology feel of the saga, which it really is. It is the great modern mythology that we have going on. And, gods were always producing offspring that were deities that would come back and defeat the god later or play a role in that. And to me, it
Yeah.
is, Vader created Threepio, and then Threepio ended up playing some small role in his downfall down the line. And so that just worked for me. I love it. And also just the notion that he is some sort of a brother for Luke and Leia on top of that.
Mhm.
So back at the Queen's ship, we've got the sandstorm going on, and Sebulba has sent a transmission saying the death toll on Naboo is catastrophic. They must bow to the Trade Federation's wishes, and she must contact him. And before anyone can respond, Obi-Wan jumps up and says, "This is a trick. Do not reply or send any transmission." He contacts Qui-Gon, who responds, "Yep, this is a trap. It's a bait to establish a connection trace." And then Obi-Wan has his concerns, which is, what if it is true? What if the people are dying? Qui-Gon says, "Well, then we're running out of time." Um, so, what did you think about this, Greg, with Sebulba's transmission to the Queen?
It's this time around, I was really thinking about, is Obi-Wan wrong here? Because I do think we now know there is death, destruction. There are prison camps on Naboo, and maybe all happening off screen, but this is now established. And I think all of that was too dark to put on screen in this movie and would have really changed it. I know you talked a little bit about this last week, that you kind of need to leave it implied in this, but the storytelling tells us that there's a lot of suffering going on. And so I found myself really questioning, you can't hear that Obi-Wan, it's a trick, send no reply, without thinking of every podcast that lifted that into their soundscape at some point. But I found myself really saying, like, oh, I think, I do think it is a trap, but I don't think it's a lie. I think they are trying to bait them into making contact, but I don't think they're lying that there's really some serious suffering happening on Naboo.
Jay, what did you think?
Well, with Theo Bibble, he obviously was very concerned for everything that was going on. And as we were talking about with the last segment, is that you don't really get the feeling that, yes, there's an invasion, there's, all of these things, there's these labor camps going on, but it still seemed very civilized from the way that you saw it in this particular movie. And you don't really realize until much, much later the depth of the suffering and that type of thing. But I've always thought of Theo Bibble almost like the White Rabbit in, the Alice in Wonderland series, I'm late for a very important date, kind of a thing. He's always like, oh my gosh, it's catastrophic. And he's very dramatic about everything. And so it's like, is this really the case? Is he overreacting because he doesn't know what to do while the queen is gone? And now all of this has fallen to him. And, so is it making mountains out of molehills, or, what really is going on here?
Yeah, I've this is another scene I've thought about a lot, and that's what I love about these segments is that this is something that on a normal viewing it sets up how Darth Maul can find them, which we'll talk about here in just a second, and that is the key part of this scene, and it also kind of introduces some anxiety for Padme / Amidala later in this. But okay, thinking about this for a second, because Sebulba's really selling this. You must contact me. The death toll is catastrophic. We must bow to their wishes. But when they were leaving Naboo, he knew the importance of her getting to Coruscant, that was the only way to deal with this situation, was to get the support of the Senate and kick the Trade Federation off there. So the question it makes for me, and I can't remember if this was brought up in E.K. Johnson's book or at all or not, was what was he going through at this time? We know a number of the handmaidens that were left behind were being tortured for information, but because he's clearly been put up to this, and like I said, he's really, really selling it. And when you think back to earlier parts of this movie, he's like so indignant about everything that the Trade Federation is doing. They wouldn't dare. I mean, he's like, he's very protective of the Queen and his homeworld, stuff like this. And now he's done a full 180, which is got about their wishes. And so, yeah, I mean, I can see why Obi-Wan be like, yeah, this is definitely a trick. Don't answer it. They were trying to establish it. And he's correct. That's exactly what they're trying to do. But I can also see the grief that it causes Obi-Wan. It's like, we're going through with this to get the Queen to Coruscant, but what if it's true? Are we doing the right thing? And so there is this moment of doubt, and the answer is not apparent to them, and through the Force, and that's what they rely on. So, Okay.
Well, and in the background of that really serious conversation, I just want to point out Shmi and Jar Jar are cooking together at the back of that scene, which I hadn't noticed till this view. And I clearly spent a lot of these 10 minutes, really trying to pick out new things. And they're kind of hunched over the counter, kind of clearly, I imagine, chopping up vegetables or some such there together. So it is. Phantom Menace is this juxtaposition between like the biggest, most galaxy-changing things and the small kindnesses and the kind of home life that people can still eke out in that context.
Indeed.
Well, food has always been, kind of a central thing with Star Wars. I mean, even, you think about A New Hope and sitting around the table and Beru making the food and serving the blue milk. So it's, that's just one of many, many, many instances where food plays a big role.
Okay, so speaking of connection traces, we get our glorious shot of Coruscant, and as we're panning in, we get a shot of the Moldy Crow leaving orbit. If you don't know what that is Kyle Katarn's ship from Dark Forces, which I point out every single time, and no one else in the room cares but me whenever I'm watching it. So there it is. But we see.
I didn't know that. That's also
I didn't know that was there. Yeah.
That's
Thank
one
you,
of the. That's one of the Easter eggs I learned about a long time ago. And I'm glad I could share it. So Darth Sidious and Darth Maul are on a balcony. They are talking. Maul is getting ready to head to Tatooine. There was, in fact, a transmission that he traced there, and he believes that it's going to be able to find them quickly because there's not that many people on Tatooine, which is ironic because when Maul ends up there all those years later looking for Obi-Wan Kenobi to get revenge, he's lost wandering around the desert. But hey, that's that. Different time. Sidious tells Maul to move quickly against the Jedi first and then take the Queen to Naboo to sign the treaty. And we get the bulk of Maul's dialogue in this one scene. At last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. At last we will have our revenge. I think he has like 6 other words in this entire movie beyond that. So what do you think about this tete-a-tete between Maul and Sidious, Greg?
I was so caught by your comment in the last Phantom Menace segment where you pointed out that Sidious is just about always a literal phantom. He's almost always a hologram, and this is the one exception that we get both of them in the flesh. It's almost like a reminder that they are real, right? And obviously we'll see more of Darth Maul from this point forward, but that this isn't just phantoms, but there is something real there. So it's such a funny little scene. Kind of my associations with it are all almost off screen. First is, this line of Darth Maul's was in the trailer, and man, you shared trailer talk a little, Kara, last time, and I had a friend whose mom was home during Good Morning America when they played the trailer, and she videotaped it. And then we did the thing where you put the two VCRs together with a cord and you copy from one tape to another. And so I had a VHS of Good Morning American trailer that I wore out. I didn't go to Legend of Bagger Vance or Waterboy over and over again. I had that tape. So it's always stood out to me that line of Darth Maul's, at last we shall reveal ourselves to the Jedi, at last we will have our revenge, is so striking in the trailer, and was one of those lines that got me really excited. So to hear it here, and I do believe it's Luke Pace, the actor who's the voice of Darth Maul, I believe at this point, who would go on, I think that's right. Now I'm second guessing myself, but he's in Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh, you're right. It's Peter Serafinowicz. I get those two actors confused. But Peter Serafinowicz, who is in Guardians of the Galaxy, who is he's Nova Corps official.
Right.
You're right. So it's just this rare moment of Darth Maul talking, as you said, and the final association I have is, now it is Legends, but the Darth Plagueis novel features this scene, and Darth Plagueis himself, I believe, is on a different balcony spying on this interaction, which to me was just one of the shocking things about that book was, when we hear the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, I thought it was a long, long time ago, and the fact that he was still alive during Phantom Menace and overseeing and interacting with Sidious after the event of Phantom Menace, I believe, was really shocking to me. So all of those are packed onto what is already a kind of stirring scene.
That's such a good book. Love that one.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Dennis and I have often thought about maybe reviewing that one on the podcast. I think we might have to do that, Dennis.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's we got a long list of Legends books we need to
do.
get through. It keeps growing.
And that one feels like one they haven't contradicted, so I can still say that that's canon in my head, even though it is Legends. It's one of the last Legends. I think it's 3 or 4 at least.
Well, and I was just I'm looking at the book on my shelves off to the side while we're talking about this, and Luceno was one of my favorite authors that did Star Wars. He wrote so many good ones, and I guess he's pretty much retired at this point, which is too bad because I'd like to see him contribute more to our current canon that we've got. Jay, any thoughts on that before we move on?
Oh, just how stinking cool Darth Maul was. I mean, I fell in love with Darth Maul just like, first sight. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but and also I think too, I have a story with Darth Maul and my niece who was actually 6 years old at the time. And she and my nephew are the two that I brought to my first viewing, and she fell in love with Darth Maul like right away. And so we kind of had this mutual admiration society going on. And of course, that was something that that I latched onto right away so that I could feel that fire and that fandom in this young girl. And so so Maul has always been very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, Maul was the only action figure I bought from the Phantom Menace, and I lost it. So
he's
gone. All right, so let's get to our final scene in this segment, and this is back at the Skywalker homestead. They're having dinner. Shmi and Anakin are explaining that how they have transmitters implanted in them as slaves, and if they try to escape, then they'll get blown up. Padmé is expressing her disbelief in slavery in the galaxy due to the Republic's anti-slavery laws, to which Shmi responds, "The Republic does not exist out here," which kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. I don't know why. This makes me feel like a 5-year-old, but every time I see Jar Jar using his tongue to snag food out of the bowl, and squeeze me, and then Qui-Gon catches his tongue and tells him not to do it again. And this is when Anakin brings up the podrace, and Qui-Gon says, "Oh, he's seen one in Malice Stair before. It's very fast, very dangerous." And Anakin responds that he's the only one that can do it. He's doing everything he can to impress Qui-Gon and Padmé. I think in this scene, particularly Qui-Gon. But then Qui-Gon responds saying he has to have Jedi skills, or reflexes, I should say. And then this is when Anakin springs on him that he knows that he's a Jedi. Are you a Jedi? I saw your laser sword, and only Jedi carries a weapon like that. Qui-Gon's response is, "Well, perhaps I killed a Jedi." And then Anakin's like, "No, don't think so. No one can kill a Jedi." Qui-Gon just kind of chuckles about that, which says he wished it was true. We get this whole discussion about whether or not Qui-Gon has returned to free the slaves. He says, sadly, that's not why he's here. They're on a very important mission. Anakin talks about his dream where he came back and freed the slaves, and then they get into this entire discussion about their predicament, why that they don't have any money, they've got to get this new hyperdrive. There's got to be a weakness. Shmi points out that it is gambling, that everything revolves around the pod races. And this is where Anakin proposes that he being Qui-Gon, enter this pod race, enter Anakin's pod. I'm tripping over my own words here, because Watto doesn't know he's built it. Shmi objects. And then the Anakin points out, the biggest problem in the galaxy, as Shmi says, or in the universe, is that nobody helps each other. And then Shmi relents, saying, there's no other way. I don't like it. But Anakin help you, and I think he was meant to help you here. I skipped over a whole lot of details here, but this is actually one of the longer scenes in this segment, and a lot gets talked about here. So, Greg, of all that, what stands out to you?
I'm tempted just to talk about the Jar Jar tongue lollipops, which are infamous, probably inspired by this scene. And I believe as of social media today or yesterday, they are on display at Lucasfilm again for the 25th anniversary. Phil Shostak showed a big case of Phantom Menace merchandise that's been put out, and those are there. But I think I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about Shmi. And it's really wonderful to me that this franchise was defined by "I am your father," right? The line that changed everybody's life in the 80s, and we get this redefinition of the Skywalker line, and it's really beautiful that it's Shmi who is the first Skywalker we know of. Obviously, she came from somewhere, but we don't know how she got the name Skywalker, and we know little about her, other than the fact that the one thing she instilled in her boy was that the biggest problem in this galaxy is that nobody helps each other. And for all the darkness that will infest this line across these 9 films, that goodness is there and is stronger from this moment forward. And, we have to remember that this then is a matriarchal line, right? That it starts from Shmi and it flows through the goodness of Padmé to Leia and down to Ben Solo. And, I'll say it, and to Rey, right? Because Rey takes the Skywalker name at the end. And I think to connect those two figures, and, Rey takes that name probably standing within 100 yards of Shmi's grave, I think means something. And it's really wonderful. And this scene, I think, is an example of that kind of homely quality, that homey quality, not homely as in ugly, but homey quality of this family, and that family matters in this story, and will continue to matter in this story.
Oh, very well said. I love that. And you're right. It just goes to show what the innate Skywalker legacy really is. And even though Anakin kind of shattered that in his fall to the dark side, in some ways, but eventually was redeemed, I mean, you still have that foundation. And that foundation is something that, I think is definitely very well illustrated here with Anakin saying, Mom, that the reason that, and people just don't help each other, and that's why things happen the way they do, and of course I'm butchering the line, but y'all know what it is. And but yeah, I just love that. It's that innocence, and that empathy and compassion.
Yeah. Well, and you just pointed out, or made me realize too, where does Anakin get his redemption? He stops and decides to help somebody, right? I mean, it's his son, and it's different resonance, but it's Shmi's wisdom there. Maybe next special edition we'll take out the no and have the echo of Shmi's voice saying that line.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's great. And Shmi is such an understated character, and then I know that she's very well loved, but she really is just kind of like the cornerstone of everything.
So here's the bigger question for you both. What do you think Qui-Gon has seen in Anakin at this point to trust him and go along with this plan? Because Padmé says, I'm sure Qui-Gon doesn't want to put your son in danger. We'll find some other way. When Shmi's like, oh, there is no other way. This is it. But right after this, in the next segment, Padmé be like, "Are you sure about this? Putting our fate in the hands of this strange boy?" And but and then we'll find that Qui-Gon's like, "Yeah, hey, Queen trusts me, so should you." Those type of things. He's all in on this right here. I mean, I don't know if there's a concrete answer to this. I don't really have one, which is why I'm asking. But what do you think? What is it that's happened so far that makes Qui-Gon think that this is it?
I think there is a line in the novel. Just I think it's in the entrance scene when Padme and Anakin run off to his room. There's a funny moment. Qui-Gon turns to Shmi and says, like, "He's a very special boy," and Shmi's like, "Yeah, I know." She has. I mean, there's no tone in a book, but it felt like yeah, you're a stranger. I know who my son is. But I think to me that tipped off that Qui-Gon was already sensing something, right? And
Mhm.
I think I'm taking your question is like, is it possible he really sensed force ability yet? And I think the answer is no, but there's something drawing them together, right? The fact that they essentially, ran into him almost immediately after leaving him behind, and that he got pulled in this. I feel like he's sensing more that the force is drawing them together more than he's necessarily saying anything inside of Anakin quite yet. Although we do get that hint, you must have Jedi reflexes, right? If he really is a boy able to pod race, and there is pod racing on Malastare. It's a very tough level on the racer game, but it is a fun one.
That's a good point.
Having been there, I do think you need Jedi reflexes from my crash record on that course.
What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you just said, Greg. And there's that whole thing that, like you said, Qui-Gon's got that in his head, like, okay, you must have Jedi reflexes if you can do pod race. Humans just can't do that kind of thing. So right away, you just see those wheels in his head turning.
Yeah, and as we're talking this out, it's beginning to give me some thoughts on this. One, we were talking about earlier in this conversation about the attention to the living force, which is kind of the moment to moment, what's right in front of you. Was the cosmic force, especially if you read John Jackson Miller's book, is described as like the big picture force, which is not what we're talking about right now. And we're supposed to be mindful living force. And would he really tease this boy about having Jedi reflexes in
Right.
this scene here, which is, that, you must have Jedi reflexes. And then, it's like, I can see there's no fooling you. And I don't feel like he's doing that in a patronizing way, which I think like any other adult probably would have in this point, because Anakin's been showing off like ever since he met these people, which is, oh, were you an angel? And, I've always been good at building things. It's how I managed to last this long. And, rescuing Jar Jar from Sebulba, and then buying things from the vendor and offering them shelter. It's just kind of like, he's doing everything he can to impress them. And I could see a lot of adults trying to just indulging that. But I don't think that's what Qui-Gon's doing here. I really feel like, based on what we've learned of him so far in this movie, that, yeah, there is some sort of resonance in the force here going on for him. And he feels like things have been put in motion and they brought him to this point for a reason. So can't say that definitively, but I feel like that's the takeaway for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great one.
I just want to give a little credit to Jake Lloyd, who got unfair criticism at the time when he delivers that line where Qui-Gon says, "I haven't come to free slaves," and Anakin says, like, "I think you have." Like, it's just got a little bit of Jedi swerve on it that makes you feel like he knows that is fact, right? And he's proven right by the end of the movie. So it's really incredible that Jake can all of that out in that line read. And people tease about the yippies, but the fact that Anakin is saying yippee 1 minute and kind of has these deeper levels. I made a horrible choice in my personal life this week and went and saw the new Omen movie, which just reminded me that that's what they wanted. And a lot of people wanted Anakin to be like Damien from those movies, right? Like this dark, brooding child. And I just think Lucas was so much smarter to give us this version of Anakin, and I think it has stood the test of time because of both that choice and Jake's performance. I shouldn't say Jake Lloyd's performance.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I think he's been unfairly maligned. I liked it when Ron Howard stood up for him all those years ago, a former child actor himself that talked about what it was to be in a position like that. And, and what do you want Jake to do? The script was the script. And for all the things that we love about those movies, there was some very stiff dialogue that these actors had to get out there. And a lot of the direction was faster, more intense. And we can respect George's vision, and we respect everything he did to move the art of filmmaking forward with what he did with the prequels, and still be critical of some of his writing decisions and his directorial decisions. Because he did try to bring another director on there. No one was up to the task. They were all intimidated by that role. He could have got a Lawrence Kasdan or something like that to write the script for him, and maybe come up with something that was a little bit more this is the word comes to mind, even though it may not be fair, but palatable. But a child's performance is a child's performance, and you chose the actor, and I think he turned in as best he could do, and that's fine.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so my mini rant is over, and that brings me to the end of this segment. Okay, I vastly underestimated how much we're going to be able to talk about this segment, because it's one of the things that always happens when I'm trying to figure out where to cut it off. Is that I was like, well, if I cut it off here, that's just short of 10 minutes. Is that going to give us enough? But if I go through the next scene, that's going to put us over the 10-minute mark, and is that going to be too much? And I don't care. This was a great conversation. Greg, thank you so much for joining us for it. I really appreciated your insight. Before we let you go, you want to remind everybody where they can find your work across all your different platforms and everything you do.
Well, and thanks to both of you again. You're podcasting role models, because few shows on in the Star Wars space manage to get the breadth of coverage you two do, and I can tell that is a lot of work to cover comics and books and news week to week, and all the TV shows and cosplaying and everything. So I'm really in awe of the work you two do, and I hope you know how valued it is in the community. I just have a few projects going on. Primarily, I appear on the Rebel Base card feed. Greg and I do reactions to the Star Wars shows as they're airing, and so we do format we call Batch for Breakfast when it's Bad Batch, and we try to get it out by breakfast time Saturday morning, so you can have your coffee and enjoy our questions about the episode. We challenge each other with questions, and then let better, more talented podcasters answer them in their shows later in the week. And then I also am a co-host on the Long Take Review podcast, which is spearheaded by Jen Subchakshai Bankard, and then PT McNiff and I are two co-hosts. And we handle each week we talk about some different movie that's come out or is just hitting streaming. And we focus a lot on the Oscar race, which thankfully is over at this moment. So we're getting a little respite, getting ready for next season. But we just did a great episode of looking forward to the great movies ahead of this year. If people want to check it out, it's called our 2024 Hype Draft. It's a great one to check out.
Awesome.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us here. It's been a real pleasure. All right, there you have it. That was Gregg Cass. That was a really, really great conversation. I was explaining here, it's difficult coming up with these segments because you never know exactly how much conversation you're going to get. Sometimes you can tell, like if it's some iconic scene, Luke, I am your father from The Empire Strikes Back. There's a lot to say there, and I did not anticipate we'd have as much discussion blossoming out of this one as we did. But I'm glad he was here. That was fantastic.
Oh yeah, so much fun. And that time went by so fast too. So I hope everybody else enjoys it as much as we did.
Yeah, well, just couldn't stand the thought of cutting it off because we were really getting on a roll there with some of that. So, well, with that having been said, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this installment of our series celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, then hey, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher choice, and you'll get the remaining, what should be 8 episodes in this series as they come out each month, and all of our other great content covering the Bad Batch, other Star Wars features on Disney Plus, the news, comics, everything we cover. You'll get it if you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'd also like to remind you that you can find our entire catalog of past shows over on retrozap.com, which includes all of our discussions of the prior movies. We've done The Empire Strikes Back, Rogue One, Attack of the Clones, Return of the Jedi. We've done several of these now, and we're hitting all the movies up on their anniversaries. And you can find all those shows there. We'd also like to remind you that RetroZap is home to several other great podcasts covering all your favorite geek topics. So if you're looking for your next great listen, head on over there for that. As always, we greatly appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews on whatever podcatcher it is that you use to catch your podcast, especially if that's Apple Podcasts. And we absolutely love it when you share the show and your favorite episodes on social media with your friends. So, Jay, remind everybody what those contacts are one more time.
Sure thing. You can easily connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out our Pinterest boards and our YouTube. We have both regular YouTube and YouTube music. So head over to both of those, like and subscribe. And then we have our Discord room, which is part of the RetroZap Discord server, which is a heck of a lot of fun. So the link to that is in our show notes. So if you want to hit us up for some real-time chatter, just go to that link and boom, you're there. And then we also have a TeePublic store, and as well, the link is in our show notes for that. So we have 7 different show logo designs available on apparel and home goods and everything in between. And then we are also partnering with Saber Masters, and we have our referral code Stardust at checkout. If you go ahead and put that in, you'll get an extra $10 off of your already amazingly, wonderfully affordable lightsabers. So if you want to check that out, you can go to sabermasters.com. And again, once you put in that code, you'll get that $10 off, and it also helps to support the show. So with that, Dennis, fill everybody in on what you got going on with Warp Trails.
Right. So season 5 of Discovery started last week. And so my wife and I are talking about that on our Star Trek podcast that Jay just described as Warp Trails. You can find that exclusively on the RetroZap podcast feed. You can also find it over retrozap.com. You can find all of our past episodes there. But yeah, join us for some good Star Trek discussion there. Jay, Cosplay Mageddon rolls on. What is the latest?
Yeah. Well, I'm just coming off of Fan Expo Cleveland, so I'm really excited to share my experiences there. And this coming weekend, I will actually be in Worcester for the pop culture convention there. And then I do have a couple appearances coming up for May the 4th, so I'll be filling y'all in on that. And you can check out all of the fun and all of my different cosplay builds over on Instagram at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Upcoming on the show this Friday, we'll have the next episode of The Bad Batch to discuss. And then on Monday, we're getting back into Star Wars news. So thanks for listening to episode 717 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.